Welcome to this week's research overview. We're going to be talking about subtraction. In subtraction, you might be thinking, yep, there's a standard algorithm, there's something about borrowing or regrouping. What does that even mean? We're also going to be talking about 3 persistent misconceptions that occur. What is subtraction? What's a good language? And what's the progression of models and standards from early grades to upper grades? So another thing we're going to talk about today, that there's actually 2 types of subtraction. You can think of it as the difference between two quantities, or the distance between them, or the other way is a takeaway, or we like to use the word removal. And within that, there's 2 types of subtraction problems that come up. One is called separation of ideas, and the other one is compare problems. Okay, what are these 3 misconceptions? First misconception is that when you subtract, you're always getting a smaller amount. That's not always true. It is in the early grades, but then when we start dealing with like negative numbers in upper grades, that's not always true. A second one is that subtraction is always takeaway. It's not always takeaway. So we have to be very careful about when do we use the word takeaway and when do we talk about this idea of distance and this comparing idea. And the third one is when we focus independently on each column and do subtraction, a lot of times students do it incorrectly. For example, when you have 2 ones and you're trying to take away 8 ones, kids just look at, oh, 2 minus 8, 6. And so that would be take away 6, a negative 6, but it's definitely not just 6 there. So we're going to be talking about some of these ideas here. So let's talk about the language. What is subtraction? Subtraction, you have the minuend minus the subtrahend, and that is equal to the difference. And really thinking about, a lot of times teachers talk about part, whole, but that's actually a different type of problem. I like to think about it more as the quantity. So you have that minuend, it's really just the starting quantity that you have, and then the subtrahend, you're taking away some amount, so that is a second quantity, and then the end with the difference. Okay, that's the typical way of looking at subtraction. Now that's perfect for these separation problems. So I have 53 tomatoes, and I sell 28 of them. So there you're thinking kind of number line. You're seeing that you have this quantity, the starting amount, and then you're going to be taking that amount away. You're jumping back on the number line. That's one way of thinking about it before we get to the standard algorithm. But another one would be, well, what if I had 52 tomatoes and you had 33 tomatoes? How many fewer do you have? How many more do I have? So that is a distance. We're looking at the distance between those 2 quantities. And so that's a different way of thinking about the subtraction problem. So then that starts talking about those progressions of models. So early when we're dealing with kindergarten, we're giving story problems and we're getting kids to think about counting up, counting back. That's a really important idea. And the number line is really nice model for that. If we're doing compare problems with numbers, we're going to use the bar model so you can see the difference of the 2 quantities, and then you look at that amount. Now, for young grades, it's really, when you're talking about how many more, a lot of times it is counting up to get to that other quantity. As we move into upper grades, we want them to be flexible and thinking, yes, counting up, we can also just subtract those 2 quantities or amounts. So now as we start thinking about these models, we have the number line in the bar model. And then as we get bigger numbers, we're going to switch to area models. So we want to see the quantities of 10, and we're going to represent those as 10s together and single ones. That's a really important idea. And then we can start talking about subtraction, where if we have the idea of 42 minus 28. So initially we want to say we have this quantity, 10, 10, 10, 10. So we have 4 10s, and then we want to represent 2 1s. We want to do it with proportion, spatially looking at this type of model. And then we're going to ask the question, if we're going to have 42 minus 28, so we start with the 1s, and so it's 2 take away 8, we want to ask the question, do we have enough 1s to take away 8? So when you have the visual model and you're seeing 4 10s and 2 1s, then the initial answer to that question is no, we don't have enough 1s, we only have 2 of them. So this gets at the idea of borrowing. Most teachers are not using that word because we're not borrowing it and giving anything back. We're using the regrouping. But I actually like the word partition. So what we're going to do is we are going to take one of those 10s, it's a unit of 10, but we're going to partition it into 10 1s, and you can visually see that you now have 3 10s, which then you can go back to the symbolic model and match that, and now we have 10 ones and 2 ones, which is 12 ones. So you visually see that. Now you can ask, do we have enough ones to take away 8? Yes, I do. Now we can take away the 8, and then it represents the 4 ones. Then you can go back and go, okay, I have 3 10s left. I need to take away 2 10s. Do I have enough 10s to take away? Yes, I do. I can take away those 2 10s, cross those off. I'm left with 1 10. 1 10 and 4 ones. So that's 14. So that's a really nice way of visually seeing the mathematics, because you're building that conceptual understanding first of what's happening with smaller numbers. Then we can start moving into the standard algorithm. So now we don't have to have the visual model, but we still have to have that same language. And we can move from multi-digit numbers to decimals as long as we're asking those questions, keeping place value language there, we keep it intact. That's a really important idea. So to recap on a couple things. So we don't want kids to have these misconceptions that subtraction is just takeaway. It's takeaway and comparison. We want to make sure we have this language of partitioning whatever place value unit. So we make sure that we're not just individually talking about the digits and getting that incorrect answer, 2 minus 8, and just saying it's 6. And that subtracting is not always about getting a smaller number. We hit those in those middle school. So if you want more examples on this, we also have teacher tips. So check out our teacher tips, which we talk about what is subtraction at those early grades, kinder, first and second. What does it look like in third, fourth, and fifth? So we'll talk about what the standards typically are, what the models are, what the language is in real time. So go ahead and comment below, ask any questions. Please like and follow us and share this information with other teachers or parents that have kids.